What a day. It's warm. It's like a tropical storm up here. Warm, wet, bands of rain, leaves are changing. It's a really interesting fall day. Why I'm out here on the porches is I was trying to demonstrate to you guys some of the, I guess, the features, the strong points of my setup here with this crawler. I've talked about steering angle, talked about tires, and now I'm talking about center of gravity and how that affects your ability to side hill, just run along on a flank. Or to climb, to how vertical you can get. And the stability of the chassis under those extreme circumstances. Because the shock angle, shock position, the length of the links front to rear, the whole overall height of the chassis, the weight of the chassis, and the distribution of weight throughout the entire crawler is what builds that ability. You have to have good everything. You have to have good tires that are firm enough they can handle laying on their side. You've got to have your weight distributed where you wanted it, low as possible. Notice I've got my battery forward and low, got my motor relatively low, got weights on the axles, got a very lightweight Lexan chassis, only weighs 3.5 ounces, 95 grams. And I'm using the cheapest shocks you can buy, basically, that don't leak too bad. Axial Wraith shocks. They're very long for a crawler. 105. They've got 30 millimeters of travel back and forth. And your shock angle is what really makes a huge difference in how much articulation you have. Right now, I've got approximately 45 degrees of articulation. Where my shocks bottom out, I'm at about 45. The axles are twisted to each other. I find that's about ideal for how I crawl, what I like. And to get to that point, you have to choose shock angles that take that 30 millimeters of travel and give you pretty much closer to 70, around in there. You're trying to almost double how far your shock travels, and the way you do that is by angling it. And so if the shock was totally upright, I would only have about maybe 15-20 degrees of articulation like a road car. And that would be great if I was traveling at high speed and hitting a lot of irregular terrain and I needed to keep my vehicle planted and not flip. But this is a very, very slow vehicle. It moves extremely slow, so all the irregularities that it encounters in a slow and progressive manner, and the idea is to keep the tires in traction and to keep all four wheels, if possible, in contact and allow the chassis to be that connecting point without making it top heavy. And without limiting your clearance, you want to be able to drop over things like this. So ride height, which can also be set by where you put your shocks, is critical. Too low, you're going to hang up on everything. Too high, you're going to tip over every time you get at an angle. So that again is a balancing act of how high can I get it. And you can get higher if your chassis is lighter. If you keep all your weight low, you keep everything relatively light that's in the chassis. My electronics weigh virtually nothing. I've got two ESCs that have been decased. I've got a BEC, and up here I've got a receiver. And they're all pretty lightweight compared to things like the motor, the battery, the actual gears. The weight of this vehicle is right here. So how you set up your axles, how you set up everything, is all going to be part of it. But the chassis has to allow for the correct geometry, in the sense it wants to be forward, the weight forward. You're going to want your shocks to have not too much articulation, but enough articulation. You're going to want your springs to have the right amount of tension so that you're not too firm and you're not lifting the wheel up. So as you start to lift this wheel, you're not just lifting this wheel as well. And that's why I designed this chassis, which I call the Eclipse, the way I did. Not only do you have a cluster of 7 mounting holes with an additional 8 in case you run a really short shock and you want to run a short shock with limited articulation down here. But for the 105 millimeter shock, I've got a cluster of 7 holes that allow you to change your ride height or change the way the shock moves, how much travel you get, and to also affects how the springs are acting on that force. You can move them forward, back, and then I can move this entire shock mounting member, which is one piece. I can move it forwards, backwards, up, or down with these holes. So this allows you to change the kind of shocks you use, to change the kind of springs you use, and to move the whole thing up, down, however you need to get the exact right tune-up for how you crawl and how you build your crawler. Because You don't go to the store and buy something like this. You get individual components and you create it. You've got to test these things. You can't just draw something like this on paper. Oh, this looks cool. I'll do this. No, there's a lot of geometry involved. The location of your uppers, location of your lowers, distance of all your links, exact position of all your shock mounting holes. It's all really critical, and it's not something that is immediately apparent when you just look at a chassis. You may not know if that's a good chassis or a bad chassis. You really have to drive it and test it and see. And so that's what I'm in the process of doing right now with this Eclipse.